Welcome to the Fantasy Football Hot Stove with your hosts, Scott Simpson and Jamie Calandro, with special guest, Matt Waldman. Welcome, everybody, to the Fantasy Football Hot Stove. I am Scott Simpson, your host, Nimble W Numbers on Twitter. So excited to be here on a special Tuesday night. We made a few little arrangements to have our special guest on, so I'm excited to come to you on not a normal night. We normally do Thursdays at 8, but we're here Tuesdays at 8. I'm joined by my co-host, Jamie. Welcome, brother. So excited to see you. Another teacher out there in the works, kicking it, reaching students every single day. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great. It's a Tuesday night, like you said, but that's just 2 less days we had to wait to get on here and get back at it. I'm looking forward to this again. He said, I'm Jamie Calandro, JAC3600 on Twitter, senior analyst at fantasyteamadvice.com, and we are super excited to have our guests, and I'm excited to join you tonight, Scott.
Oh, yeah, and we have one of the best in the business, folks. If you have not heard the dulcet tones of Matt Waldman talking over filmed highlights of college athletes, then what are you doing with your life? Like, what? Seriously, what are you doing? This guy is one of the I love it, man. I'm alive when I'm watching your videos and I'm listening to you talk about splits and about, coming off of breaks and all those kinds of things. I love the routes run. So we're excited.
I want that to be my ringtone now. I'm just going to drop a soundbite of that and make it my text tone every time someone texts me to be living in the living room.
No, that's awesome. So if you don't know Matt specializes in breaking down film. The rookie scouting portfolio is a benchmark here in the industry of the NFL. Scouting is awesome that Matt does, and so I do have his Twitter available too. He's Matt Waldman on Twitter. Welcome, sir. So glad to have you today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Matt has been around, like I was saying, for a little while. We'll just say he is one of the godfathers of Twitter here in fantasy Twitter, football Twitter, NFL Twitter. You've been around since 2008. I mean, that should. Did you get one of those special balloon or symbols or anything when you turned 13 this year, or is that still coming?
I don't think the bar mitzvah is happening for Twitter at any time soon, but certainly it's funny. I worked in a marketing department at a university, and when Twitter became a little bit of a bigger thing, I just created something because we needed to be aware of how to use it and start learning how to use it. And then I just started applying it to football at that point. So I was in early, but it wasn't out of any like great vision on my part, to be honest. I was fortunate in that regard.
Well, I do love the fact that you are a visionary, because you've brought what you have seen and what your perspective on the game of football, you brought it to us. So whether you think you're a visionary or not, I definitely think you're a visionary. So we're excited to tuck in and get to know you better. And so we're going to start right away. We have a segment called The Hot Seat, and this is brought to you by one of my favorite hot sauces ever. And I don't know if you're into hot sauce, Matt, but if you are, you're going to get sent a nice little bundle of Hot Box batch. This is a gourmet hot box sauce, or a hot sauce made by one of my friends, Bo_McBigtime on Twitter. He is my co-conspirator over at Nimble W Numbers. He made this sauce for a league, for a dynasty league. He loved it so much. We loved it so much. It became a product that he sells, and he started a whole company. And so we're going to send you some, but this is sponsored by Hotbox. We're going to start with some, softball type questions, and then we're going to get into the meat of the heat, as they say. So here's just a softball for you. We all love football. That's why we're talking about it on a Tuesday in May. We all love it. What's the best part of the game of football? Like when you get down to it and you're sitting there by yourself watching either film or the game, what do you enjoy the most about football?
I actually enjoy the physicality of the game. I like seeing really the grit that players show. Just the ability, because football is an emotional game. We certainly look at it with numbers. We look at it with analyze all the strategies. We look at all the technique. But at the end of the day, you can have a great strategy, and if you're just outplayed physically or intimidated physically, those things go out the window. It's kind of like, football is like playing chess and during a ballroom brawl on biker night. That's kind of basically the way I've described it oftentimes in some articles. And I like that aspect of the game because it requires, when you have that kind of element, it not only requires intelligence and intuition, and confidence and performance, but it also is, you have to be tough. There has to be, you have to be physically tough, and as opposed in terms of imposing your will on people. But you either have to be able to do that, or let someone, or be able to handle someone trying to do that to you and show them that it doesn't impact you. And to me, that there's something about that emotion of the game that's never going to go away that I really love.
No, that's really well said. And I think that, I would not say it differently. I would say similarly. I think what I love is, I don't care if it's offense or defense, it is when somebody maximizes an effort on a play. And so maybe they're not the best corner or the best linebacker or the best run, whatever it is, but you just see them and they want it more than somebody else. Like you said, that grit, and it comes out, whether it's in the pile for a loose ball or a hit, or anticipating a quarterback or whatever it is. It's just to see that in real time, somebody who wants something more than somebody, and then they get the ball and they go defense. I love defense. So I love offense for fantasy purposes, but if I see a good defensive hit, my favorite football player growing up was Alvin Walton for the then Redskins, the Washington football team now. And he would be illegal in this NFL because all he did was spear people with his helmet. And he was a killer, but I love that he was tenacious, and he wasn't that great. He wasn't a super skilled athlete, but he fought. And so that kind of embodied it. And so I love your answer. Jamie, what about you? What do you like about football?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of on the same wavelength as you. Like what you said, about that extra effort on a play. I mean, DK Metcalf chasing down Budda Baker has just lived in my brain for the past months of that. That's just that one thing. I'm sitting there watching the red zone. I don't think the Giants were playing at that time. And I'm sitting there watching the red zone, and I've been watching a lot of football, and I'm following my fantasy teams, and just watching that play, that got me right up off out of the couch. I'm not a Seahawks fan. I'm not a Cardinals fan, but that's that kind of play when you're watching football that makes, reminds you why that game elevates over some of the other ones that you see, for sure, with me too.
No, that's awesome. Okay, so here now we're getting a little. I'm giving Jamie the first hard question. See how I do this, Matt? I don't want any smoke my way from you because I love you. I'm making Jamie do the hard turn now. So, Jamie, why don't you hit him with the heat?
Okay, so we know, and we're going to find out too as we go along. We know that rookies is something that you've been well versed in for quite a while here. So I'm going to give you kind of a two-parter here. So as you're studying, football is a 12-month out of the year thing for fantasy. As you're studying rookies and you're preparing and you're doing your analysis and you're doing your write-ups, what would you say is the biggest hit on a prospect that you've had that others may have missed? And then maybe the flip side of that, like what is a player that you missed on that maybe the film was strong? I can tell you mine in that sense was Ryan Matthews, and I went all in on him with that when he was out, and that cost me that year. So maybe a two-part question. What do you think about that, Matt?
Well, before I answer mine, I'll start with Ryan Matthews because I really liked Ryan Matthews too. I knew his trainer, and his trainer basically told me back in this day. I couldn't share this while he was playing, but Norv Turner that second year was ready to make him the guy, and then he showed up to workouts and promptly vomited in basically the initial workout to pass the physical. And what happened there is that he was being begged by his trainer, who got him into the draft, got him drafted in the first round, or at least was very helpful in the workouts to get him there. He begged him to come in and work out all summer, and he didn't. And he basically described Ryan as a guy who had a very difficult childhood in many respects, and he was someone who wasn't very self-aware, went through a lot, and masked his insecurity with overconfidence. And I was told in his first game when he fumbled the ball away, before halftime that they had to call someone to convince close to him to convince him to go out for the third quarter of that game. So the mental part of the game just wasn't there. The mental emotional game was hard for him, and he was a massive talent. He just was a guy that's one of the things that's easy to miss on is it's not the film. It's oftentimes it's what's going on upstairs and in here. And these are young men, and it's a performance sport, and performance is hard, as you know. Some people do great in rehearsals, and then they don't do very well when they get up on that stage. And then if they mess up on that stage, even if they're usually good, can they overcome it and work through it and play it off? And that's hard, and that was hard for him. I would say Dak Prescott was a guy that his tape was better than I had thought at first. And then when I went back in hindsight, I realized I probably needed to revamp some of the ways that I studied players, because when I started the RSP, I was really playing this gigantic game of I Spy where I was writing down everything that I saw on every play. I mean, the RSP literally was, 1,800, 1,900 pages, and a lot of it was raw notes as I was learning the game. I was literally transcribing football. That would probably be the best way that you could put my process. And then at some point, there was a point of diminishing returns where I wasn't watching as many games as I should. So if I was kind of teetering between, one tier and the next of value for a player with different skill sets, if I hadn't watched enough of him, I might not have had a decisive enough viewpoint on that player, and then as a result erred on the side of conservatism, in terms of that player. And that's what happened with Prescott. And that was the point where I realized it was like, okay, now I can, instead of watching 4 to 6 games of every player, let's see if I can get to 8 to 12 of each player where I'm documenting information and doing that. Because I looked in hindsight at his game and I realized there were multiple areas where I was on the border, and if I had gone in the positive direction with just 3 of maybe the 5 areas, he would have been one of the top 3 to 4 quarterbacks on my board instead of the 7th or 8th. So I missed on him. And then, I mean, honestly, I've been fortunate in recent years with some hits. I mean, I've certainly missed on other guys. Demaryius Thomas is another good example. As a guy who I just didn't think was going to grow into being more than just a really top athlete. And he got Peyton Manning, and Manning really helped him out a ton. But Nick Chubb, I had him over Saquon Barkley. A lot of people thought I was crazy for that. And I had that. Lamar Jackson, I thought I'd explained to people that he was a terrific pocket player, and was a guy that was terrific under pressure. It was just that he needed to be, he wasn't going to be your normal pocket player in the way that people would look. And Patrick Mahomes is what I'm probably most known for over the past 5 years. I have a scouting report out on Patrick Mahomes that I'll just say that I was told by an operations person for an SEC team. It's been a while now. He's gone. Oh, he was at LSU. He told me he used to watch my YouTube videos, and he got a job because he learned stuff from my YouTube videos. And they said they literally told him that they had never hired a non-football person for this operations position. This was just after LSU won a national championship. And it was like, I have a long overdue thank you. And I was reminded by that to give you a long overdue thank you, because I'm at the combine right now, and there are 2 chief scouts that were talking about you in a line that I was in. And one of them said, if I ever meet Matt Waldman, I'm giving him a big hug. So nice. So that trio of Jackson, Mahomes, and Chubb, and probably Cooper Kupp would be another one, are guys that I've been different than the norm with folks, and how either high I rated them, or just rating them highly in the first place. But I would say it's to the degree of what I said about them that I've become known for.
No, that's great. And I did reach out to Sigmund because, I love Sigmund. And I just said, hey, I need a couple Matt, not softballs, but things that would be good to talk about with Matt. He said, talk about Pat Mahomes. And so I didn't even have to. I mean, he knew. I think that's indicative, though, from what I've seen. And we'll get into your process later, but just how thorough your process is, and how, looking at some of the stuff that you've written about your process and written about kind of losing your football innocence, you've kind of coined it as that. it really does help. As I've looked at it, you to understand the game from a less biased perspective. You're taking the bias out. All these little things really help you to understand the game in a more detailed way. So I think it's cool. So with that being said, I am in some DM groups and some, I've been on Twitter for about 2 years now, football Twitter, and I picked up this little tiny animosity with the film grinders versus the analytics nerds, and there's this kind of playful thing that goes back and forth. And Peter Howard, who I love, I'm in a group, and there's a lot of analytics nerds in this little group. They call themselves the nerds and the DM group. And so I dropped in this retweet or this tweet for them to retweet today. I said, oops, I said, did I drop in a film grinder on you guys? I'm so sorry, because I love all forms of studying the NFL, but film grinding is my favorite. Looking at film and understanding players and what they're capable of from an actual eyes on the field perspective, I think a context perspective, to me is the most important. But what is this feud that's kind of there? What is the back and forth between these kind of groups that you can help me understand it a little better?
Well, I think it's for people who are more on the extremes, if you ask me about it, more than anything else. I mean, truth be told, I started out just looking at data because I started out as a fantasy player and then a fantasy analyst in 2003. And I was basically looking at the numbers more than anything else. When I'd watch film, my version of watching film was falling asleep to college football games with my cat in my lap. That was basically, waking up and go, oh, Steven Jackson, he had 100 yards. I wish I saw some of that. That was kind of me back in the day. But I realized, as someone who was an operations manager and quality director back in my previous lifetime, and someone who learned best practices for how to try and reduce variation with your processes for monitoring or evaluating performance. And that's what I took. I took some training that I had received from a best practices type of company that applied these types of things and taught people how to use it, and not only applied it to the company that I worked at, but also applied it to creating the standards for the RSP. Mm-hmm. And so really all film watching is analytics if you're doing it in the way that you need to do it. And so what I'm trying to do is, I'm not telling you it's scientific, but it's a craft. And if you're doing and applying numbers is actually a craft too. As I listen, my brother has his MBA, or excuse me, his master's in stats in Columbia, and he has a PhD from Harvard. And he is very much a mathematics, numbers, stats guy. Some of my readers who have worked in the NFL in the fields of analytics and also scouting are very heavily based numbers guys. And what you try to do is, at least for the RSP, I try to reduce variation of how you look at things, because the three of us, it's like making the peanut butter sandwich. It's like we could all come up with 3 different ways we make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But you want to make sure that you define the process you want to use for that based on the type of kitchen you run, and how efficient it's going to be so that you can make other dishes as well. And how often you are going to be dealing with supplies and dealing with, wait time and all of that kind of stuff like that. And that's one of those things that it takes being on that same page so that that everyone knows what they're looking for and how they're going to do it efficiently. So as a result of that, I think what happens is that, at least, for me, my perspective of it is that the film and analytics thing is really one area with just on each end of the spectrum. But you have some people who think that, and it's their shtick, I think, more than anything else, whether they say the film doesn't lie, and that's all, and that's all you need to look at, and all this data is just basically a medicine tent show where you need to make sure that you guard your children because they might run off with them at the in the middle of the night after telling them one thing. And then on the other end, you have the stats guys who who say, I don't even need to watch film. I'm such a true believer in film that they also come across to other people as might as well be, religious zealots, which to them would be mighty insulting because they see themselves as being highly scientific, but they come across as like
pure,
unwavering believers in something to the point where it's like, well, what you're looking at is data that comes from observation. It's observational data to an extent, or a lot of the things that you're looking at. So really it's about combining both. And I think what happens is usually it's people who feel marginalized on one level or the other, who are usually complaining about one or the other. And I've certainly had my, over the years, as I've learned, as we were all learning about Twitter and learning about the dynamics of Twitter, I've certainly have had my arguments with people on both sides of the equation about this particular subject. But you'll find that some just like to do it because it's their business operating principle. They're like, I'm going to be a heel, and that way, if I can get some people who will follow me, just like, whether it's your favorite conservative or liberal talk show host, either way, they both troll the other side. That you see a lot of that with this particular sphere. And I think that's where the animosity, it gets generated a lot.
Yeah.
No, and that makes sense.
I'll just say quick too that, like, I mean, you're talking to me. I'm in this industry. I make my day off of numbers. Being mainly a DFS analyst before anything else, like I crunch the numbers every single day and look at the matchups and look at everything like that on paper and then identify based on that. But I mean, I watch the games too, and I'm just going back to Patrick Mahomes, which you use as your example for someone that you were on, and the crunching the numbers is all well and good, but it doesn't show you like how well Mahomes plays off script or how his, the decision making that he does that is just so different from the average quarterback in the league. So, I mean, I think you're right on with that numbers are good, but you have to see them, I mean, it's not like that ability that Mahomes has doesn't play into the stats that he puts up every year.
Yeah, Jamie, and one of my favorite analytics people is Chase Stewart over at Football Perspective. And the way that he talks about it is that if the data doesn't reflect what you see on the field, then you need to figure out different data. And I think that's a very simple way of looking at it, but it's true. But even the way people track information, I mean, listen, years ago, I got into 4 or 5 years ago, I got into a debate with a very good data person about Baker Mayfield. And I was explaining how that Baker Mayfield's accuracy data, that the way people are tracking it, isn't doing some of his flaws justice. It's kind of skating over what he is. And, the debate was, well, you've got film watchers who are respected, who are looking at the numbers, and they've come up with it, and they're talking about how great his accuracy is. And I'm like, the thing that's tough about film and data is how it's applied and how it's tracked and how you're looking at the information. For me, the film is about tracking data. I literally have, between 80 to 100 points for every checklist of criteria, 100 points of criteria that this blackboard used to be filled with criteria that I had revamped for my wide receiver page, that was sitting there for 2 years that I was considering and shaping and figuring out how I'd do it. But what I'm getting at with this is that when you look at like a guy like Baker Mayfield, there was a time where people just look at accuracy stats and say they didn't question the process of how the data was tracked. And I was looking at it and saying, well, people need to break this down into buckets. It shouldn't just be about an accurate pass is an accurate pass, because some passes are catchable. And yes, if the receiver doesn't catch it, you'll hear a football analyst say he should have caught that, or any fan or anybody looking at it. But was it really placed in the spot where the receiver had the chance to make the most of the play? Would Bill Walsh, and there's a great story with this I tell often, is that Bill Walsh was once conducting a practice and Joe Montana throws this post pattern to Jerry Rice in tight coverage. And Rice makes this nice adjustment for the ball, and the coverage isn't exactly, it's tight, but it's not where it needed to be ideally. And Mike Holmgren, who was the young assistant coach at that time, compliments Joe Montana for the throw, and Walsh pulls Holmgren aside and gives him literally a 5-minute lecture as to why, like, that was not an accurate pass. It needs to be pinpoint. And this is what pinpoint is. And the reason that it needs to be pinpoint is, what if the defender is covering him perfectly? We should still be able to, he should be able to catch in stride. If he has to make an adjustment, then he could take a hit that could dislodge the ball. He might get hurt, or he might not get to where he's supposed to get to, all these different things. And so, I was talking about with Mayfield that his passes, his accuracy percentage may be really high in terms of completion percentage, but the number of pinpoint passes that he threw was much lower. And a lot of that is a product of him either waiting too long to make the right decision and then throwing it into a coverage that he didn't need to throw it into, or forcing his receivers to have to make adjustments that they shouldn't have to, like the ball being thrown behind them, and not passes where they're being thrown open. For instance, Mac Jones this year throws some beautiful passes to Devonta Smith, and what you see repeatedly are these sail routes or corner routes where he'll throw the ball behind Smith. And while Smith's breaking towards the back pylon, the ball's thrown there because he knows that the coverage is playing a certain way, where the coverage is going to be underneath and undercut the receiver. And they know this from practice. They know this from doing this. So they throw the ball behind, and Smith is expecting that. Now that he may have to leap and make an acrobatic catch, but to me, that's a pinpoint pass. Now, you have to define those types of things to make sure everyone's on the same page for what an accurate pass is. If you don't, then you might have 20 people over at a stat tracking service who are doing this all differently. Because I used to manage teams like this. I used to manage 70 different branches of people who evaluated performance. And I had to work with different managers and say, how are you defining this? This is how we need to define it. And if it doesn't match the definition, you need to change the definition. Because if you don't, you're going to let errors slip through the cracks because you've got one person defining it as this guy needs work, and this person being an absolute stud in what they're doing. And this happens in the NFL a lot, because when you have evaluation practices that are like 0 through 9 as your score, and there's no explanation for what that is, then, it's easy to no one to be on the same page with that. And then also, because they want to be, and they don't want to get fired, or they don't want to stick out like a sore thumb in a bad way, because it was hard enough to get that job, then it's like, well, I really like him, but I don't know how everyone else likes him, so let's give him a 4th round grade. Or I really don't like him, but everyone seems to like him, so let me give him a 4th round grade. I mean, it's like those things happen, and it's like the person who gets a 3 on an evaluation in a 1 through 7 format, where no one gets a 6 or 7, no one gets a 1 or a 0. So they get 2s and 3s, and it's like, and if you've been someone who had to give evaluations with that kind of format, you know how this goes. And I think scouting suffers from the same issue sometimes. It's not about how much they know, but how it's set up so that they can make the most of their knowledge and have it filtered or funneled in a way to maximize their skills and help them continue to build on them.
Yeah, and the teacher in me is just loving this, because my previous job, I've been a teacher for 18 years, and I had to go back to the classroom. My daughter had some health issues. For those who do know, she's doing well right now, but I had to kind of leave. I'm not even allowed to be in the classroom right now because of these issues. So I'm on leave at home. But previously, before I went back to teach 3rd grade, I was a consulting teacher, and what that meant is I had a set of standards for my county that I would go into, and I would evaluate, and I would watch, and I would write down every single thing that was said. I would observe everything that happened at the same time, and then I would go back and I would break down my notes by standard, and then look for patterns and look for trends, and then pull those together and put a formalized report together that just says, here is what we're looking to improve on. And so, like you said, the NFL, I mean, you got Dave Gettleman in one hand, you have John Lynch on the other hand. Their processes are going to be a lot different. How they rate, how they evaluate, what they think is important, and how, I mean, you saw it in the first round this year, smoke screens and lies and tricks, what they're saying to the public. And then, Trey Lance goes at 3. And, I heard it was going to be Trey Lance. Then I heard it was going to be Justin Fields. Then I heard if you don't take Mac Jones in this bet on, DraftKings, and you're an idiot. And then, it goes and goes and goes. And so one question I had about, all these draft players, we have evaluations as fantasy analysts based on where they land, based on their draft capital, based on a lot of factors that go into it. Who do you think, based on this draft class this year, and I know you can't predict the future, but who do you think might underperform or bust, let's say, and not be a huge bust, but just underperform based on their draft capital, based on where they're being evaluated? A la Henry Ruggs last year really didn't perform up to that first pick as the wide receiver 1 last year. Who's somebody who might bust, who's up high, and then who's a player maybe later on as the follow-up, the flip side, who maybe is undervalued, but you can see them kind of rising up. Maybe it's a Terrence Marshall or somebody like that. I'm not trying to put ideas, but just somebody like that who was not drafted in the first couple rounds, who might shine in the position they're at.
Well, I mean, the people who follow me know that I had Trey Sermon rated as my number 1 running back. So, and the fact that he landed on the best running team in terms of the most diversified use of scheme, probably some of the best collection of linemen who operate well together in an offense that is designed to run the football well and with that versatility and efficiency. And he's a versatile and efficient running back. And you have to also understand that in addition to that, Raheem Mostert's gone next year. Wilson is a nice backup. Jeffrey Wilson, he's gone next year. But the trend, people will look at that and on the surface will say, well, they like to use a committee. Well, not really. They had to use a committee because every time someone started to play well, they got hurt, whether it was Matt Breida, whether it was Mostert, whether it was you can name a number of anybody, but whoever was the guy got a significant number of touches, enough to be a running back 1 in fantasy football. And when you trade up with fewer picks like they did to get Sermon, I think that's a guy who's going to overperform. I'm a little worried about Devonta Smith, mainly because I'm okay with the size element of his game, though I thought in any offense he would be a guy. Jeff, man, it's always nice to see Jeff in the audience here. But when you look at Smith, he's a guy that is physical, deals with physical coverage in a way where he's going to have to get better against patient physical cornerbacks. And in any offense, that was going to have to happen. But there's ways that you can fix that. One is like working more to the inside with your releases against tight man coverage than always trying to take it outside and getting pinned to the boundary. That's an issue that often happens with him, and he doesn't use the inside as much as he should. He may never get strong enough to say he's really strong enough to defeat, or overpower defenders. He's never really going to be that, but he can get a little stronger so he can handle the pounding a bit. But my bigger issue isn't him. The bigger issue that I have is really dealing with whether Jalen Hurts is going to be the guy and whether this offense is going to match what they want to do with Devonta Smith. They've spent a lot of money. They've spent a lot of picks in the past 4 to 5 years of guys of Devonta Smith's height, weight type of deal, like his physical profile. Now they're less skilled guys, but they've spent a lot on that type of profile. And then last year they got Jalen Reagor, who Fran Duffy over at PhiladelphiaEagles.com, he and I were having a conversation. He said, listen, the Eagles called Gary Patterson at TCU and said, tell us about him. And he said, he's a terrific prospect, but we misused him. We used him as like a jump ball threat. We used him as kind of more of an above the rim player. And he's really better fit to being a quick hitting receiver in the middle of the field where he can get yards after the catch and then also win deep on some double moves. But you want to use him in more in your quick game and less in your like deep vertical contested catch game. And then the Eagles went out and did exactly what TCU was doing and misused him. Now this year they plan on doing it a little bit differently with Nick Sirianni as the head coach. That it's probably going to go back to that, but you still need someone to stretch the field. And I think they got Devonta Smith as a reason to do that. And I don't know if Hurts has the level of accuracy that I'm looking for
Hmm.
to be as consistent to make Devonta Smith like a primary guy. Can he make him a Marquise Godwin type of player who's kind of one-dimensional, or what Ruggs did last year, and or Nelson Aguilar to an extent? Yes, but is he going to be worth that early pick? I find it debatable, and I think a lot of it's going to be up to whether or not they have their quarterback, and I'm not sure Jalen Hurts is that guy yet.
Yeah, I mean, accuracy. I know he didn't have a fair shake in the end of the Eagles season last year. Was just, I mean, it was an abomination of football. Everybody said. I saw the tweeters. People were just, hemming and hawing. But yeah, I think that is going to be a problem for him too. If their whole offense kind of does a reset. I mean, I think they will this year with the new coach coming in. It will reset. But I don't have much faith in Philly this year. I still don't. There's just not part of me, and I'm here in Washington area. I'm not a Washington football fan anymore. I have been growing up, and so I'm very versed in the Eagles, and I think I started watching them before Cunningham was around, and so I know them. They're dangerous. McNabb would trounce the Washington football team all the time, and I would see it, and it would just make me sad. And but the Eagles are not where they have been, just recently in the Super Bowl season a couple years ago. So they really have fallen, but not as far as they did last year. But they're going to struggle, I think, this year a little bit as well.
Yeah, and Hurts is a guy that certainly can throw the ball accurately downfield. But the issue with him more than anything is that the more he gets the more he buys time, the more invested he gets into trying to find a big time solution to a play. And it's kind of like the running back who thinks he can out athlete people by bouncing outside or finding the cutback, and winds up losing 7 yards when they could have gained 1 or 2 and kept their team on schedule. And Hurts is the type of guy that I've seen, at least on his tape, both at Oklahoma and at Alabama, where if you force him to move around the pocket, the longer he has to move to find he's like, I'm going to win this play, even if it's not the play that, even if he should just throw the ball away. And to me, Smith is not that guy that you're going to want as like Alshon Jeffrey, Brandon Marshall, kind of go, or even a Tyreek Hill go up and win it type of thing as consistently for the NFL. He's more of the post route double move, first option, beat the defender, throw it up, put air under it, and let him go down the field and win it with his speed. But as soon as that option isn't available, unless he just gets behind the coverage and is waiting out there, like out in the outfield, just waving. And how many times is that going to happen? I mean, it probably will happen 3 to 5 times a year. So, and he's not going to convert 100% of those. So if you're, you can tack on a couple of good plays, maybe 5 or 6 more good plays that are big plays that are off that first read. But that's not a wide receiver one fantasy type of, that's, type of, performance, year long. That's a guy that you go, oh, Ted Ginn will give me some good looks in DFS, occasionally according to the matchup. And because he's so cheap, I can get him that way. But you're investing a lot in a guy like Smith, and I'm worried about the return.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Well said, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's like an in-depth reason to, and I like, as a Giants fan, hearing any kind of concerns that come the Eagles' way. And just before we move on too, I love the point, about the running backs that you say are, I'm just going to beat you at this because they're used to it in college. And that's one thing I think you can see with rookies too, is that part of that big learning curve is learning to understand that the defense on the other side is now not, maybe 1 All-American every 4 games you play in college. It's 11 All-Americans that are on the other side, and linebackers that are always going to beat you side to side if they get in the right situation. So I love that point as well. So, I mean, if we're moving on, just to kind of talk about rookies as we are, you've made football a career. Clearly you love the game, clearly enough to study it in depth. So just the question is, how did you first fall in love with football, and what led you to study rookies of all things?
Well, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, early on in my childhood, and that was back in the early '70s. And then I moved to Atlanta in 1980. But football was something that we just played. We played outside, we played in the snow, we played at recess, we played in the street, whatever it was. And video games weren't. There was Pong on Atari. That was basically the video game that was hot when I was growing up. So video games really didn't get big until I was about 12, 13, 14. And by then we had spent a lot of time playing sports outside anyway. So I grew up falling in love with the game from seeing NFL films and seeing a lot of their NFL films greatest moments and the way that they kind of, used propaganda to build the game. I mean, but the music was great and the slow motion photography, and you could see, it really told a story, and you got to see that close up. And I, being from Cleveland, most of my family loved football. That was really the sport there. They grew up around, watching Jim Brown and Otto Graham and Paul Warfield and players like that. So, there was a lot of, just like if you were in New York and hearing about Frank Gifford and, even, Fran Tarkenton or Y.A. Tittle and Sam Huff and all of those guys, those would have been the guys that would have been talked about if I were growing up in New York. And so I don't know, I always loved football. And I remember that I was a latchkey kid for a while. So when I was, I've talked about this, but I've learned how to read. After I learned how to read, I would sometimes like fake getting sick. I'd wait till my mom would go to work, and then I'd go to the bus stop and then come back home. And I had gone to the library the day before with this as kind of a plan, and I'd get books on football players, and I would read about, I'd read about running backs from the 1960s and 70s, and there'd be profiles about these players that were in books, or just the great players of the game, from Sammy Baugh to Dick Butkus to, all that stuff. And my parents, my mom and the rest of my family would encourage my reading. So they'd buy me more books on football, and I'd learn more about it. So I guess you'd say it was always one of the things that I loved. And when it came to rookies, I was first a fantasy writer or fantasy analyst while I was working my corporate gig. And I got into that because I was in a work league, and then a lot of my friends were at KFFL. A lot of my who had a wire, like a news wire, and they would write for the news wire, and they would tell me about Football Guys. Was a really cool site that was doing a lot of great stuff at that time, and they were telling me about that as well. And I finally kind of took the plunge in 2003. Like, I wrote an article for Football Guys in 1999. David Dodds really liked it. They published it, asked me if I wanted to do more, and I promptly turned them down. And in another 3 years, I wrote somewhere else and never even thought about asking Football Guys at that point, which was kind of funny because I really liked the site. I just didn't think that they would hire me. So I went somewhere else first, at FF Today, which is a fine site, and they do a lot of great work, and they do a lot of free work too. But I guess the thing is that as a fantasy player, and especially back in that time, there were far fewer websites. Not everybody was online. So you had to find angles where you were pretty good at something, and you could find pockets of strategy that were very helpful to you. And for me, it seemed to be rookies. Like, I seemed to have a fairly decent idea. And when I say decent, not compared to where I am now, and it's laughable compared to where I am now. But it was just kind of that spark, it was kind of a spark being where drafting Terrell Davis early, or drafting Edgerrin James in the first round, or doing some things that were kind of odd, but worked out, and being able to identify some of that stuff. And so I think at that point, as I was starting to write about fantasy on a regular basis, it just became interesting to me because I was listening to Gil Brandt talk about a player, and he talked about him in a way that I related it to work. Like I thought, wow, there's a lot of work politics into drafting players. It's not all about talent. Draft capital isn't strictly talent. It's about whether they have yardage and production, whether they went to a big school, whether they have the height, weight characteristics that you want, whether they're characters in the way that they'd like it to be, all these different things that just make it so that the hiring person doesn't look as much of like a fool if that person misses, because they got the kid from the big name school as opposed to the undersized, underqualified looking kid who failed and had lots of injuries and things like that. And and when I realized that it was just like the corporate world in many respects, I was like, I want to just look at pure talent, because it's easy to, if you base everything off of draft capital, it's good for fantasy. You can use that and say you can say it's a predictor of talent, from a fantasy perspective, because you're basically reducing risk, but that's not as accurate. It's kind of like saying someone who went to a certain college and didn't graduate there as an alum. No, they're not an alum. They're a matriculate, but no one knows what a matriculate is. They only know what an alum is. And for sake of just being nice and for talking about affiliation and all of that, they'll say the person's an alum. And so to me, it's the same thing. Like if you really study the game, that draft capital does not equal talent. It just reinforces the person's draft capital, reinforces the heavy investment and the bias of how teams are going to give reps. Because it's not a fair competition once they get to minicamp. It's just, not everyone gets the same reps. And the fact that James Robinson had to ask that Doug Marrone had to ask for permission from his executives team to let James Robinson actually compete for the starting job after he started to show some flashes tells you all that you need to know. That's indicative of what you often see with a lot of teams.
No, that's really helpful. And I hearkening back to what you said about skipping school to two teachers, I love that. First of all, there's something like Bart Simpson-esque about that, which I love. And then I can just see you being truant and an officer or somebody finding you and being like, "What are you doing? You doing the drugs? What are you doing?" "I'm doing the football. I've got football fever, man." You're just addicted to football. That's the love I want to hear, man.
Just a latchkey kid in an apartment in Cleveland, Ohio, literally reading books to a bewildered parakeet. That was basically me. I mean, so that was my thing. I like to do every once in a while when I saw some books I liked at the library that I wanted to read about, and I was, so yeah.
It's like the NFL's version of Matilda. Truck the little wagon down to the library and get a little stack of NFL books to bring back.
I'm gonna have my guy Jordan Vanek make a meme of like a little kid walking down the street with his book wagon, and then like put Matt Waldman's face right there. There's Matt Waldman right there with the book wagon.
You can just put a little RSP on the wagon, Yeah. There we go.
Yeah, games of players' tapes falling out of the back of it. That's so funny. I remember those NFL films. We would go to Errol's Video, and we would get the NFL's hardest hits, volume, whatever it was. And me and my dad would sit there, and it was like, and I think it was Steve Sable, was it then?
Yeah.
And he would just say something like, "And little did he know, coming around the corner was," and then bam, somebody would smash it. And I fell in love with football, like you said too, where there's a story behind it. It's not nowadays it's a little different. We're all fantasy driven, we're data driven, DFS money. It's a little bit different, but I still think everybody loves a great story, and a great fantasy story is great. People getting tattoos, people out in bridesmaids dresses on the side of the road. All these things really do make for what a fun, great sport this is to turn into all of these side experiences that we're doing now. It really speaks to what a great game it is. And so when did you kind of talked about doing your corporate gig? When did you figure out, okay, this is cool. I like doing this so much so that I want to kind of transition away from this corporate gig into fantasy football, or not fantasy, but just football full time?
Well, my corporate gig really was something I grew into that I didn't expect to make a career. It was a part-time job while I was in college that turned into a full-time gig. And by the time I graduated, I was making a salary where I was like, I don't really know what I want to do, but I could buy a house here in Athens, where I lived in Athens, Georgia at that time. I could buy a house here and just work this gig and figure it out. And then that grew into, well, now I'm in a relationship, and now then I'm in a long-term relationship, and I'm helping raise, my ex's kids, and we're trying to build a family, and we're thinking about our future. And then I'm looking at all of this, and I'm looking at my job, and everyone's like, "You're the last person I thought that would still be at this company." And I still was, and it was a large company. It was a good company. It's still a good company and everything, but it just wasn't what I had planned. And I think I was becoming increasingly miserable there, as time went on. And I had always done some writing. I had done freelance writing. After I had left music school and I was younger, I went to UGA first to do journalism. And they had a good journalism program, but I wasn't really all that interested in it. But I did it, and I had no experience. But within a week, I was covering the UGA football team practices. And I was pretty good at it, I guess, so much so that I had a Sports Illustrated writer who was a staff writer there in the 70s and early 80s, who was now teaching magazine classes at the journalism school, saying, "Have you ever done this before? Have your family ever done this before? Do you know anybody who's ever done this before?" And I'm like, "No." "Well, you could go pretty far with this if you wanted to. I can help you get some into the door to maybe get some internships at some nice papers like Sacramento Bee back in the day and things like that." And he, told me everything that I wanted to hear as a musician that I didn't hear. And I was still working out some knots in my own life. So after a semester of doing that, I was like, forget journalism. I don't want to do that. So I ended up becoming an English major, but I was still writing. And I was doing freelance work, and I did some freelance work for him. I did some freelance work nationally, ranging from performance type of narratives to copywriting to journalism. And so I just, at that point, I just thought, I need to find a way to get out of this gig that I'm in. And first it was fantasy football and trying to build a website. I had a friend, and I had this idea of like all these mock drafts. Let's make an automated mock draft app that will allow you to draft against the computer, but the computer's going to make smart decisions. There's probably 1,000 people who probably seriously thought about this and actually did something towards it like I did, but it didn't work out, and somebody else ended up doing it better, which of course was the case. And then I met up with someone as I was making that site. I met up with someone at FF Today, Mike McGregor, and I had been writing this column called The Gut Check that I named that for this particular site, and then ended up going to FF Today, and I'm still writing it at Football Guys right now. But Mike and I had thought about, Mike had this great idea of saying, what if we could I have this idea for this fantasy game where you just pick the matchups each week, and you can pick players, and it's like a one-on-one game where you play each week, and it's, and I was like, we looked at it, and I helped him with some of the idea, and I said we could call it Fantasy Throwdown, and we had this site called Fantasy Throwdown, and it was literally the first DFS game, but we never were able to really take it to market and build it the way that we needed to, so it didn't really work out on the level that it could have. But all this time, I guess, around that time, I also had started the RSP just as an experiment, and it was like my second year it was after my my third year of writing for fantasy, and thinking this could be my way of making some extra money and maybe growing this as a business, because it seems like this is getting more popular I love what I'm doing with this. I like writing about football. It comes easy. And this whole rookie angle seems kind of cool. And I think that I want to try it. I mean, I know that I know very little about studying tape, but I know that I have a process that will help me learn. And that was the big thing. Is like I knew the process was good. And that first year I bought a TiVo and decided I was going to record every game I could possibly get on broadcast. And I did that. And then I had only watched about 40 players and not a lot of tape on any of those 40 players. And I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, for this year, I need some time. So like I took a week off, took my TiVo, took my PC, my office chair, put it in a van and went to a hotel and literally rented a hotel for a week and did nothing but watch tape for literally like, I think I logged the hours. I did like 129 hours that week. Yeah. And I barely slept. I literally just took cat naps and worked and watched probably about 60 or 70 players at that point. And I thought I'm either going to hate this and know that this isn't for me, or I'm going to fall in love with it. And I need to know, because if I'm going to put this if it demands this amount of time, I need to know. And when it was over, I was like, I was exhausted, but I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And was like, I've got to give this a real shot. And I thought, I'm going to give this 7 years, because if it takes a publication 3 years with backing and financial backing and a real plan and experienced people, it takes 3 years for a magazine to make it, I'm going to need at least double that with what I don't know what I'm doing to try and just sell something online organically and see if I even make any headway whatsoever. So that was kind of the backdrop of what was going on. And while we were balancing different things, I didn't know which of the three things were really going to work out. And when, while my relationship ended shortly after the RSP was the first year, and it had nothing to do with the RSP. I mean, that was, I wasn't even working nearly as hard on anything as I did in the years after that. But when about a year and a half later, when I met my wife, who's now my wife now, I had been balancing several things, and I'm like, I have this thing called a DFS game that we're trying to like get to market. I'm writing for a fantasy website. I'm writing for a magazine as a features writer at the University of Georgia. And I'm doing this rookie publication. I think it's this rookie publication that's really going to be it, but it's probably the least likely thing, but it's still the thing that I have a feeling is going to be the thing. And that was in probably 2008, I think, around that time when that happened. So that's more of that story, I guess you could say.
That's incredible.
Oh, that is. And there's so much to unpack there. So is that when you went to the hotel, one of the articles on Matt's website at the RSP, and I don't want to fudge it, so let me actually make sure I go there. Yeah, MattWaldmanRSP.com. So it's pretty easy to remember. You remember Matt, you remember RSP, and .com. I mean, everyone's got a .com, so it's perfect. I'm going to pull it up here too as well. I was trying to show it earlier. My mouse is being funky today, guys. As a teacher, I used to Zoom, every day before they made us go back, and I couldn't go back. And so every once in a while, my mouse would act up, and I'd just be like, "Oh, are you kidding me on the Zoom here?" But here we go. We got it up. So yeah, I mean, from that point, there's an article here that I read that talked about losing your football innocence. When you kind of on this path, is that hotel room when you lost your innocence, like officially that like yeah, was that, I don't want to sound so weird.
It's when you were forever tarnished.
You're right. I would say it certainly was the beginning. It was a seminal moment of that. And I ended up writing that article as the first one on my site. It was the first article I ever put on my site. And it's still fairly evergreen. And I posted that in, I think, 2011 is when I started the site. So, but yeah, it's, I think it helped me understand that and I've had this conversation with numerous people who scout football for a living, whether it's Rick Saratella over, on my own podcast, and he's over at SI now and does NFL Draft Bible, or Russ Landy, who's a former NFL scout and current U.S. head of scouting for the Montreal Alouettes. You know, we all have stories of people saying, God, I wish I could be you. It would be so lucky one could just be so lucky to watch football all the time. And I think my wife hears this a lot, and it kind of gets her a little riled up too, because she knows the kind of work that goes into it, and realizes that it's like, there's a lot more behind the scenes than what people realize. And the simple way of just putting it is, I'll share a Russ Landy story with this, because Russ said he had somebody he met like somewhere who was like huge football fan, loved the sport, played a lot of fantasy, was just like, I would love to learn more about this and maybe watch some games with you. Could I, he's like, yeah, sure. Why don't you come over this weekend? Saturday morning, I'll be up at 8 a.m. working. Be here before 8 and we'll get started and we'll watch some tape together. Guy's all excited. Can't wait. Gets there at 8. Is excited. And then he's watching film with Russ. And like most people who study the game, like this, and you do it in a systematic fashion, you stop, you rewind, and you're watching the same play 8, 9, 10, 12 times, to look at things at different angles, answer different questions, different criteria you have. And then maybe after you've established that this guy isn't that all that good, it doesn't look like, after you've watched a couple games, you might watch still another 4 to 5 on him, because you want to make sure there's nothing you missed. And you're also trying to approach from the angle of not just whether he's going to be a good fantasy player, because the RSP is more than just a fantasy publication. So I look at it and I'm looking to see, where could he fit? What could he do for a team? Where could he possibly grow? What scheme fit would be there? Would the CFL be interested in him? Would he have an opportunity in another league? And when you're watching tape of someone that isn't just going to be one of those top guys and isn't very good and probably doesn't have a shot, but you still have to do your due diligence on them and approach it from that angle, that's where it's work, and it gets harder. And so by lunchtime, this guy's watching, working with Russ doing that, and he's like, man, that was quite a morning. I'm ready for lunch. Where are we going? And Russ is like, I usually just make a sandwich here from the kitchen and sit back down and keep working. And that guy's like, yeah, you know what? I'm out. I can't do this. I mean, like, that's just like, I had no idea what goes into that. And that's not even to mention, just like starting your own business and trying to do this. And when I started, it was, anybody who did this was either a former scout or recruiter or former player. I had none of those credentials. What I had was a process that was better. And when I say better, I don't mean it like, I don't try and say that arrogantly. I've had scouts tell me my process is what's really great. And, I had a guy who was scout for a number of different teams, an analytics guy for the league, and worked specifically with high-end executives, in what they did. They weren't just like working with the quality control guy, getting scraps. They were like dictating terms a lot in what they did. And he was a subscriber a long time and said, your process, he said, you're getting better as a scout. This was like 10 years ago. He was like, I've been buying your book since 2007. He goes, you're getting better as a scout. He goes, but I'm not going to compare you to long-term scouts who've been doing this for years. Those guys, there's some great scouts out there. He goes, but your process is light years ahead of anything and he started showing me scouting reports, and it was true. There's great scouts out there, but their process is rooted in Blesto 1959, 60s type of stuff that they haven't changed. When the fact that it's still 0 through 9 and all the things we talked about earlier, it's not this, they're not maximizing their resources. I'll just put it that way. And the fact that someone like me who has a background somewhere else can bring that to bear and learn the game. I mean, it took a lot of work. And I'm still not going to put myself up there with top scouts in the NFL by any stretch of the imagination. But I've learned a lot about the game, and I know that scouts use my publication as a cross-checking reference. And I've had And I've had football players, pro, college, consult with me, ask me questions, want to learn a little bit more, ask me, look at my work. CJ Procise's brother once contacted, the story I'll say is his brother once contacted me after I critiqued his game. He had a big game one weekend at Notre Dame, and I talked about how he really didn't understand how to run zone, and that he was more of a gap scheme guy. And he had a lot of promise, but these are things he had to learn. And the brother introduced himself to me and said, do you know anybody who could help train him? Because he saw your critique of him, took it to his running backs coach and asked him what his running backs coach thought of this. And his coach said, 100%, you need to learn these things. These things are going to make a difference for the NFL. He's dead on. And thus he asked through his brother and I helped him set up with a guy that I evaluated back in, years before, who played in the NFL and CFL and ended up doing some training, and he ended up getting a gig out of it. So, I mean, but like, it's stuff like that. It's just, I mean, it's weird how all that worked out, but I think it's important as a backdrop because it's a lot of hard work. And then the business part of it is a completely different animal too.
Yeah, no, and there was some key points. I know I don't want to keep you too long because we respect your time and we don't want to. It's a school night, right? Jamie's going to go to school, so
yeah, I don't want to run too long with you guys either. I'm sorry that I already did, but I've got more time if you need it. So
yeah, we're good.
So in losing your football innocence, there's some key kind of ideas that you put forth that I like a lot of these. And so we're going to kind of hit them real fast and kind of just have you expound a little bit on them. So the first point you said that this is me every Sunday, Saturday, Monday, anytime I can do it, is watch football alone. And so why is it so important for us to kind of watch football alone if we're going to be, even if we're on the fringe of evaluating, even if we're just a DFS fantasy guy trying to get a sense of how our guys did that week and we're watching highlights or whatever, why is it important to do it alone?
Well, if you're doing it because you have a purpose or goal in mind, then it's work. It's work. Even if you're not doing it to be a professional, but you're doing it to learn something, then you're studying. And group study can be helpful to a certain extent, but it's more likely to degenerate into entertainment and getting distracted. So you want to make sure that when you're watching alone, it gives you the opportunity to kind of write down goals, figure out what it is that you're going to watch, what you're watching for, what you're trying to do, and then do that and then do the work. And that way you're not going to be distracted.
Now, I love that purposefulness in setting down. And I mean, honestly, I've got, a couple kids here, 8 and 10. And so things happen. You're trying to do whatever it is you're doing. And as soon as that process gets disrupted and you're out of that mind frame and that evaluative sense or whatever you're doing to look into your process for fantasy that week or DFS or setting a lineup, it can be really disruptive. So I love that. And then also my family hates Sunday and football. So they kind of leave me alone on Sunday. And they're just like, Scott's going to be down there. And every once in a while, they'll come down. One of my girls come down and cuddle me for a minute and be like, can we play something? I'm like, no, I'm watching the football. But I love you. I'm really nice on Sunday. Do all the chores beforehand and really make it so we're ready to go. But I do love that as well. Jamie, how about you hit him with the next one?
Yeah. So, and also, I mean, I'm just kind of listening to you talk about, using the pause button and using the rewind button and, having this process in mind. So, I mean, not to share your entire 129 hours minute by minute that you went through, but I mean, when you're taking player notes, and when you're evaluating a player like that, and you just keep rewinding a play and a play and after one after another. What are some things you recommend, when you're taking those player notes? What specific things, maybe the key things you're looking for if you're evaluating a player?
Sure. I would say if you're getting started, pick one position and write some things down beforehand of what you think good criteria will be. Now, I share all my criteria in the RSP, so you could use that if you wanted to. I define everything that I share as well. So there's a glossary that shows what these things are. Literally the idea is that if you wanted to evaluate them yourself, you could use this as at least a jumping off point, and a very good jumping off point because it's all structured there for you. So what I'm looking for, in a very broad perspective, is how do they move? Are they using efficient, productive, dynamic movement? And some of that is technique, some of that is athletic skill. There's more technique to it than people realize. I'm looking for whether they understand the concept of the play that they are designed to run. Whether they're, when it comes to running a route, are they reading the coverage the right way in terms of the position of the defender on them, as well as the defenders in the general area around them, the coverage triangles, the linebacker, safety, and the defensive back, the cornerback. So you're looking at things like that. If it's a running back, you're looking at understanding whether it's a zone play or a gap play, what type of zone play or gap play, what the defense is doing against that, how they're defending it, what that means for, what's happening just before the snap, what's happening just after the snap in terms of how the defense shifts, how the player reacts to that. Whether, I would say, a very good thing to help understand that combines the conceptual understanding of what they're supposed to be doing with their physical movement is whether their eyes match their feet. And that's one of the things that I talk about a lot, is that their footwork is a good indication of what your eyes are doing. It's kind of like, if you play, you're a music teacher, so if someone plays with good rhythm, usually that means that they've prepared, because some people naturally have a very good sense of rhythm, but most people, if they can play something slow and smooth and in rhythm, they're only going to get faster at it and only get better at it. So if they can play something really, really super fast, they've probably practiced it very slow. And it's the same thing with football players. When you can see that they can make these adjustments and adjust basically what they see, their feet are an expression of what they're seeing, whether they're slowing down, speeding up, widening their stride, shortening their stride, how efficient they're going to make, what kind of cut they're going to use, as opposed to, one or another. There's some cuts that are more efficient types than others, things like that. So I'm looking for that, how they respond to mistakes. Do they get in the hole and have more, or do they correct the mistake? Is it a one-off type of thing? Are they, so it's really, these are all expressions of physical, technical, conceptual, and then can they tie at a higher level? Can they tie things together where you may have rehearsed, this area and then this area and then this area, and they're all in disparate parts of practice, but they didn't, you didn't coach up and say, Rashad Bateman, we're going to have you run an out route against this type of coverage. And if the shallow cornerback playing shallow zone climbs to here, you're going to convert that route on your break to a curl route and undercut that defender. No one's practicing that, but there are players who recognize that and combine their route running with their recognition of what's happening away from the ball to make a fluid change that helps out their quarterback and protects the offense. And that's, to me, integrated technique. That's the ability to improvise, adapt. It's the same way that, like, again, to give them a music analogy, it's like if you're playing over a chord structure, say you're playing rhythm changes and somebody alters the chord, in a certain way, are you going to be able to adjust, or are you and going to be able to play off of that? Or if someone, if you play a wrong note in terms of that, you were thinking like, all right, it's a dominant seventh chord, but I'm going to play, you end up playing, a natural seventh instead of the flat seven, but can you make it still sound good like you meant to do it, and still make it musical, even though you hit a boner of a note? That's the same type of thing in football.
it seems like it's like the game within the game, the back shoulder throws, the adjustments mid route, and those players that, whether the rookies or not, but the players who can sense the game around them, almost they have that, that intuitive sense of, okay, well, I see where he's breaking, and they're kind of thinking one step ahead as they go. I'm sure you can kind of not sense it, but as you watch enough film on a guy, you can just see the mental processes that they're going through, and you can kind of tell, let's say they're a receiver or a tight end, okay, they're really engaging. They understand the play. They understand the defense and how they're going to attack it. They understand what their quarterback tendencies are. So that's cool that you get to break it down on multiple levels. I would live in the all 22, by the way, if I could, just so I could see the gaps. I want to see the freaking gaps on the field. That's how I played as a lineman. You know your gap, and then that's how you survey the field. So,
and again, I mean, just going back too, because just to what you said, the stuff you're looking at and the stuff you're looking for, those intangible aspects. I mean, you're describing what Patrick Mahomes does and other quarterbacks do, like to a T. Read that offense.
You would really appreciate an article I did called Quarterbacking is Intuitive. And it's with Patrick Mahomes on the cover, but it has a pianist on there by the name of Hal Galper. If you know who Hal Galper is, you probably do. And he gave a seminar talking about, playing more on an intuitive level. And I put that into the analysis. I put the YouTube video of that on there. But the thing about that makes Patrick Mahomes especially great and some of the top quarterbacks is that quarterback to me is much more of an intuitive improvisational skill, because you're learning all the structures, that are the harmonies and understanding the theory. But at the end of the day, it's just like any type of performance, whether it's playing, whether it's music or drama or anything else, or any type of acting, where you got to be on your mark. That's it, where you've got to be on your mark. When you see the leverage and the theory's there, you've got to let that ball go. It's got to come out right then at that moment. And it's got to, otherwise you're waiting too long. And it's just like when you hear a musician who's thinking, you can hear it, it's stilted playing in comparison, or an actor who sounds wooden. Alex Smith is an unbelievably book smart, intelligent quarterback, but for much of his career, when it came to key plays, he had wooden moments, because he would approach it like a theorist. It was kind of like, okay, I see this leverage, I see where the defenders is, but let me just make sure, let me wait another few beats to see if it's really going to break open. Well, at that point, now the defender's recovered. So he's throwing it, but now the defender's able to knock the ball away or intercept it. Whereas with Patrick Mahomes, he sees that moment. He's like, let me anticipate it and let it out. It's gone. The ball's out. And you could see, and even down to his attitude. I mean, these are layers of things that don't always fit together. But for him, it fit together when John Gruden would ask him in QB camp, well, why'd you make that throw? And it was like a very daring throw, but it made all the sense in the world logically when you break it down. And because he's so quick, and he just draws because I can, it's just like, there's a little bit of a confidence there, but it's also a bit of, listen, I see the field. I see it. I know my abilities. I know my limitations. And I know that I can fit these balls in here like that. And then there's logic to it. And when, and I'll just say that I've heard from some people that there was a team that was high on him, but then when he showed some of that in a workout, they were turned off by it, because they thought that he was uncoachable. He would be uncoachable, and that he wasn't going to get away with this stuff. But it was like what he did was actually quite natural, and the teammate, the players who were in the workout were on his side, and these were pro players. But on the coaches were like, these specific coaches were like, he doesn't take instruction. He's not gonna, he's gonna buck us every which way. And I understood their concern, but they were wrong-headed, and they didn't understand how to differentiate what Mahomes does from someone who has that actual problem.
Well, yeah, and I think there's a difference between like Jeff Georging it, where you just are gunslinging it because you have the arm, It's much different than what you see, and even in the Super Bowl where Mahomes did that out of control throw. You see that and you go, well, that was a terrible throw. He should never have made it. It went through the receiver's hands. It went right through his freaking hands. Like,
Yeah.
and so you see that calculated risks he's taking, but there's a lot, like you said, a lot of logic behind it. And as you described that playing of that second note or that other rhythm of kind of when you go off script, I was just watching in my mind Tyreek Hill catching these 20-yard breaking out routes that he's like, okay, I see what they're doing. They're giving me they're getting quarters coverage or too high safety. They're way backing off me, and then they're bringing that the corners underneath. But there's a huge gap here. So if I just cut to the left or the right, I've got that 20-yard pass over the top. It's easy every time, and Tyreek Hill and Pat Mahomes can do that. So as soon as you said that, I was getting excited. So I gotta calm down here. So all right, we're almost done here. Let's go kind of rapid fire here. We're gonna go into rookies are. They've been drafted. Now we're going to kind of get into the redraft for this year. And there's a lot of different, people going Devonta Smith. I'm going with Smith, and I'm a Waddle guy. I'm a Bateman, whatever it is. So we're going to kind of go through these positions, and we'll start with the rookie QBs. And I'll hit Jamie too. So we'll go Matt, Jamie, and then I'll throw my guy out there too. And if we all agree, it's fine. But if we differ, we'll just give like a 1-2 quick reason why you disagree. So Matt, we'll start with you. QB, who's going to be the top scoring fantasy QB this year, do you think?
As a rookie.
Yes.
Trevor Lawrence, because of garbage time, because the defense is still not very good. They have good receivers around them, and he's going to have to throw to win. And he has enough talented receivers around him to be able to do that.
I love that. Jamie, how about you, sir? Who are you picking?
Yeah, I agree as well. And I think it's also just to throw in that he's someone that reading, I think the tweet it was this morning that, Andy Dalton's our guy in Chicago. Okay. But at least we can hang our hat on the fact that Trevor Lawrence will be under center week 1 for sure. So he's going to get 16 games in as long as he stays healthy. Whereas the others, it may take a couple of weeks, if even the year, to get in there. Yeah.
Well, maybe 17 would be good now that they.
Oh God, I can't stop saying that.
No, it's okay. That's okay.
Mid-year by the time I get that one right.
I'm going to say
too.
I agree. I agree with you guys too. And I think the reason that garbage time reason is so key. They gutted their defense 2 years ago, and I was so excited because I thought it was going to bring kind of Gardner suck time, that Bortles suck time, and it didn't happen. But I think with Lawrence, it is going to happen. And I think that they're going to I think that they want to run a more of a conservative style. If you look at Urban Meyer, he's a 50-50 run pass guy over the years, but I don't think that's going to happen. His team is going to be losing a lot. And so they're going to have to throw the ball. Travis Etienne will have to kind of get his, I don't know if that was a great pick in the first round. We'll get to RBs next, but he's going to have to get some of those throws and some of that work when they're 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. I want a lot of that too. So, all right, let's go to RB, and Jamie, I'll start with you. Who is your rookie RB1 this year?
I do think it's Najee Harris. I wanted to go a little bit cute with Javonte Williams, who I love this year, but again, it's just kind of the same reason for me. Just that I think that he's going to be given the most opportunity right out of the gate where he is. I do have a little concern of him potentially being overdrafted just because of Pittsburgh's passing offense, and the fact that they're always near the top in like pass plays per game as opposed to run plays per game. But I mean, they drafted him in the first round. They're going to throw him right in there. He's adept in the passing game. So he's definitely my pick for highest scoring rookie RB.
Matt, are you making it a double, or are you going to vary here?
No, I'm sticking with that too. The volume's going to be there for him. I agree with Jamie's assessment too that he's probably going to be overvalued at some point in fantasy leagues and drafts later on. But right now, he's probably worth taking if you're drafting at this point, and for the same reasons. Even though the line play isn't great, they really have nobody else. I mean, Benny Snell's a nice backup. Anthony McFarland still has to figure out how to run in, schemes other than gap plays. And so he's not a diverse enough runner conceptually yet to make that consistent impact. He might have learned over the summer, but the fact that they drafted Najee Harris tells you pretty much everything you need to know.
Yeah, and I'm gonna slam dunk that one too. I do think volume is king, and I think he'll be more consistent. I think Etienne will have games that he spikes, and he just gets that PPR volume, and it'll be a little bit, at the end, Harris is just going to get more volume, so you can't do anything with that. All right, we're going to end with wide receiver because I'm just going to say I think that Kyle Pitts is going to be the number one tight end. I think we kind of all are believing that. Hopefully, it does come to fruition, in no injuries, stuff like that. But Matt, who's the wide receiver? I think this is the most intriguing because there's more wide receivers, and they're kind of spread out around the league, and you have lots of different offenses to choose from here. Where running back was a little bit smaller of a field, so wide receiver, who do you have as the number one fantasy scoring rookie wide receiver? I'm interested in this a lot, actually.
It's fairly predictable for me. It's Jamar Chase. And I know that a lot of people worry about mouths to feed, just like they worried about CeeDee Lamb. I didn't worry about CeeDee Lamb. The mouths to feed thing is when you have three good receivers, that just means that you can create matchup nightmares for each of them, and they become more efficient in what they can do. And you also have if you have a quarterback to support them. Joe Burrow's a good enough quarterback. They each have specific roles in the sense that Higgins is probably better off as your split end who can go up high and win the ball, but he can play over the middle a little bit if you need him to. You have Boyd, who is more of your slot receiver, but he can play flanker if you need to because he's good at running after the catch. He's a good route runner. Jamar Chase can play all three positions. So that means that when they move him around, he's the guy they're likely going to move around to dictate the best mismatch in Chase's favor. So I see Chase maybe not leading the team in receptions, but I do see him challenging for the lead in yardage and touchdowns this year. And he'll be the top two in receptions, yardage, and touchdowns for his team, which will dictate to fantasy production and fantasy starter like production.
I like that a lot. And I also like that in DFS, a lot of times rookies are priced down to start the year just because there's not a gauge on where they're going to be. So there might be some early season value for him, particularly in some of these matchups if they're scheming for him and they haven't adjusted, their price kind of formula yet. So I'm getting excited about that. Jamie, how about you? Are we on the same page or are you going somewhere different with this?
No, I've been back and forth on this, and if you asked me other days, I may not have said it, but I do agree with the Chase pick here. Just to add to what Matt was saying too, I think what my bias was at first was, like he said, the mouths to feed. The fact that they didn't draft Penei Sewell kind of was, more criticized by more than it was. So that I kind of had to get that out of my head. But I mean, Chase has a track record against these NFL cornerbacks in the NFC who are also in the SEC, who are also some of the stronger defensive talents there. And the Bengals were first in pace for a long time while Joe Burrow was the quarterback last year. So the offensive plays are going to be there for him. There's no reason that they can't be having 200-yard receivers in a week with Chase and with one of the other two. So I think he's definitely the most predictable one, I think, to be the top wide receiver of this rookie class. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was worried a little bit about him until I saw the news today, and maybe it's not the case. Maybe it'll change, but that Joe Burrow back day one, he's going to be. The doctor said that he's on track to do that, and so he had his operation, I think, in early December, which it's kind of quick when you think about it. But that was the main thing I was worried about. Is just how's he going to be able to kind of, is he going to miss a bunch of camp? Is it, he's got no rapport with the receivers, and then week 3 he comes back and it's a little bit dicey. But if he's good to go and he's able to get that time in camp, and we actually have a real regular off season, last year COVID was a wild off season, and so if he's able to get a real off season, and I love it. I think Jamar Chase has a great opportunity to outperform his ADP. And Matt, I'm working on a theory here, where I reached out a couple last year. JJ Zachariason put a mailbag question out. He said, "Hey, who's got a mailbag question?" And I asked him, what's the data on wide receiver 2s on their team in relation to wide receiver 1s that are drafted, and how does that dynamic work in offenses? Thinking about receivers that offenses that produce 2 top 20 wide receivers over the years. When you got Julio and Ridley, or what was Godwin and
Mike Evans,
Evans, all these different players. And so he's like, I've never looked at that, never studied that before. And so last year I started wide receiver 2 theory. And so I'm gonna have to bother you later off air and off camera about kind of how to refine my process, because it's not super refined yet. I'm looking at, vacated targets. I'm looking at opportunity. I'm looking at volume. But last year the results were good, and it was helpful for me to hit some things to kind of keep me going. But last year, I looked at, Deontay Johnson was somebody, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson. There's just a bunch of different players who initially fantasy football owners would go, these are rookies, these are younger players. I'm not as sold on them. They are the wide receiver 2 or 3 on their team, but then maybe they didn't outperform and get wide receiver 1, but they were outperforming their ADP. And so the wide receiver 1s and the wide receiver 2s, there's a huge gap. So I'm excited to talk to you about that and get your insight into all those things, because it's like football nerd stuff, which is the stuff I love. So
well, it's funny because I've written about that for years over at Football Guys. Not wide receiver 2, but just saying here are the dynamics of teams that have at least 2 wide receivers and a tight end, or a third receiver and or a running back who were all fantasy starters in the passing game. And let's look at what are some of the similarities. And the common denominator more than anything is the quarterback. It's the level of quarterback play. So if you have a player who's capable and has had elite production, is either delivered elite production in the past, and usually that's what it is. If you should understand that they're capable of holding up an offense, supporting an offense that has multiple top tier starters in it in the passing game.
I love that it's not being afraid of like the CeeDee Lambs last year, where you already have established. I mean, Zeke had a down year, but I mean, you have stars on that team, and Amari Cooper and Zeke, and Michael Gallup came off a really strong year as well. So if you
it's about Prescott, right? It was about Prescott, and the same way that when Peyton Manning had Wes Welker, Demaryius Thomas, Julius Thomas, and Eric Decker. You didn't shy away from them, or you shouldn't have shied away from them. Or Tony Romo had multiple players when he was, or Patrick Mahomes, you can see, for them, it's because they can't find a third guy. But Kelsey and Hill, fine, but it's about finding that, does the guy have the talent? And is the quarterback capable of supporting multiple players in that offense? Yeah. And the offense will tell you that too. Snap count histories, in terms of, are they more, 55-45, 60-30, 60-40, 65-35. Those things will tell you a lot too.
Yeah. So one quick follow-up. I know we got to wrap this up soon, but one quick follow-up question, if I can kind of go off script a little bit. What do you make of like the running back in an offense like that? Because there's tons of Joe Mixon talk this year, injury aside. But I mean, I'm going with your Peyton Manning example there, and his running backs during that period was Noshawn Moreno and Monty Ball and somebody else that I'm missing. But that wasn't really where the production was coming from. So do you think an offense like that with the multiple big time receivers are going to fill up that offense and there's not enough room for the running back, or can they kind of coexist in just a high efficiency offense?
I think they can coexist, because you look at Peyton Manning was a good example of that with the Colts, and they had Edgerrin James, or Joseph Adai, who played at a high level too. So you can get that. I know that was a long time ago, but really the issue is, can they stay healthy? Because it does lead to red zone touches, and then it leads to touchdowns and closeout scoring, where if the game stays close because of the passing, or they're way ahead, that also is going to lead to more carries and touches for a back who's going to need to be involved in it. So I think it's okay from that perspective. It's just a matter of, can he stay healthy? Do they have the offensive line? And because if they're winning, if they're supporting 3 receivers due to garbage time, then no, the running back is going to be decent, but not great at best, even if he's good. But if they're winning, and they're closing out games, and they've already scored, they laid up 35 on a team, and now it's like late third quarter and they're up by 21. Well, the receivers got theirs. Now it's time to slow the pace down and bleed the clock a little bit.
Yeah,
No,
for sure.
I gotta tell you, we could have written a book about the wisdom that was shared today. I mean, seriously, I think there's an app that someone put in that transcribes podcasts now. It's like a cool thing. You just put the podcast in. I might just transcribe this and send it to Matt so that he can put it online and sell it, because I mean, all the things he shared are gold. I love it. I feel, and I mean, you know, the people in the comments were saying the same thing. Like, we're just getting smarter. Like, the knowledge about football, there's so much that you have to share. So thank you so much for coming on, Matt. I've been a fan of yours for many different iterations of my Twitter account until I've gotten to this account here, Nimble W Numbers, and I'm sticking with this one. I also manage a bunch of other ones too for different, you know, for the Hot Stove and for Chalk Blocked and the Millionaires, a bunch of other ones. But I'm all of them follow you. We think you're amazing, and thank you for all the work that you've done and how you've. I mean, honestly, I'm watching these videos. And you're like listening to you and seeing you in kind of in, you know, television, not in person, but it's surreal because I love hearing your voice, because and one thing we didn't touch on, but you're not biased in these videos too that you're watching. You're not a fan of like, I'm an Eagles fan or I'm a Giants or Redskins, so I'm going after this. You know, you're just looking at the criteria you've created. And it's not divorcing the passion. If anything, it's being passionate about the game itself.
Yeah.
And that's what just comes through to me in spades. Like, I don't care about this tight end. He doesn't mean, oh, Matt's talking about, let me just watch this tweet real quick. Oh, yeah, look at that down block. That's a good angle. Matt sealed that edge right there. I know Matt just highlighted that. So, like, all those things, I don't care about those things normally. But when you get behind it, it does open up the game like, you know, Sable would, or like those NFL films would to me. So you're a modern.
Thank you.
I appreciate that, you know, very much. Jamie, anything you want to share before you jump out of here?
Yeah, I mean, and I just to build on that, I love this kind of deep diving. You know, we love talking about, like, you know, either ors with the running backs and the wide receivers and everything, but this kind of real deep diving in is something that is really valuable to get on here. So we really thank you for this kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's my pleasure.
I'm gonna come back and listen to it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna play it for my dad. We're building my deck, and so it's laborious. I'm super sore, and I'm just gonna have your voice on there. And my dad will be like, "Oh, this is you. You're terrible. Who's this Matt guy? I like him." You know, so I do appreciate it. We are Fan Team Advice. This is I'm if you guys don't know, I'm officially part of the team at Fan Team Advice. I'm excited to be part of the team. Please do check them out. They got great content, DFS, NBA. I mean, Jamie's working all the time. I mean, he's writing stuff all the time. So please do check out Fan Team Advice. They got a great subscription service there. Lots of great, happy people. Please go over there. Jamie's writing stuff for them. Anything you want to plug, Jamie, while you got your Fan Team Advice plug going?
Sure. We've got, like Matt said, we've got DFS, MLB, and now the NBA playoffs in full swing. I have daily articles out every day breaking down the matchups for baseball and basketball. Got a couple of football things out there. I wrote a piece on potential fallout of Aaron Rodgers leaving Green Bay, which we didn't get to, unfortunately. Our optimizers for DFS are always being revamped. We have weather tools in there now for baseball. So please come check us out, fantasyteamadvice.com. Everything's right there on the page. You can navigate. The page is streamlined. So, you know, we're waiting for you. We got a good team of guys.
I love it.
And Scott added to the mix now.
I'm so excited to join everybody over there. And I don't know about you, Matt, if you're a best ball addict like I am now, but I'm over at Underdog Fantasy. I play every day, and I'm addicted. I'm not going to do a mock draft anymore because I'm not going to – people could have to go or they don't really care. It's a mock. You know, $3 or $4, I'll do a best ball draft, and it gives me the sense that everybody kind of cares about their money. Their few bucks are spending enough to really draft a team that can win, and so it just kind of helps me, Norm. So I don't know if you're on Underdog, but jump on there if you are. I'm Nimble W Numbers. I'd love to play best ball with you anytime. You know, let me know, and I'm your guy for any type of any fantasy, any DFS, any. I would love to compete against Matt Waldman and go, he kicked my ass, everybody. Matt Waldman kicked my ass. And then everyone would be like, yeah, Scott, of course he kicked your ass. He's Matt Waldman. So
spent 129 hours in a hotel room. You do that.
Right. Seriously, you're nothing. So, and then also do check out my guy, Bo McBigtime and Hotbox over at Viridian or over at Hotbox I'm messing this up. BigFlavorCode.com. There you go. BigTimeFlavorCode.com. And then also go to Viridian Global and get your merch. I didn't put it on Matt because I wanted to look beautiful. As I normally do, but they've got great gear over there, and this is my favorite hat. I wore this golfing yesterday, and it didn't help my game at all. So that's not going to be part of it. So, but do check everybody out. We love everybody who's tuned in. We had people watching the whole time, man. It was crazy. It was awesome. Bo was jumping in. Everybody, check Matt's work out at Matt Waldman, RSP.com. Check him out at Matt Waldman on Twitter. The rookie scouting portfolio, is it out yet, or is it coming out? When's it coming out this year?
Yeah, it comes out every year, April 1st. The pre-draft, post-draft's been out for about a couple weeks now. And then I'm doing projections. I'm selling projections this year for Dynasty, 2-year projections, and Dynasty ranking, complete Dynasty rankings, which will be out in June, and they'll be updated several times throughout the year.
Yeah, Matt, when you are doing that content, please always tag me, and I will retweet, send out to everybody. Yeah. I mean, seriously, that's my thing on Twitter.
I appreciate it.
To share the wealth. Me too. Yep. If I come across any of your stuff, I'm not a stalker. I don't want to, stalk people, but if you send me your stuff, I will tweet it out to the masses, because you're somebody who I consume and who I respect and who I enjoy and who makes fantasy football better. So please do check out all of his content. You'll be better at fantasy football. If you're doing DFS, you'll do better at DFS. You win more money. Your husband, wife, lover, fugitive, whatever, you'll be happier. The people that you're with, you'll be happier. If you're skipping school, whatever you're doing, you'll be happy. So please check us out. Next week we have Denny Carter, CD Carter, not any of his fake aliases. We have the man himself. He'll be here. I think it's the 27th. Because we're a little bit ahead on Tuesday. I went golfing with him yesterday. He is incredible as a person, as a golfer. He just found out about rookies, Matt. I don't want to talk any shit about him, but he just watched the draft full for the first time this year, and he loved it. He's on your camp, but there's going to be a little bit more shticking and talking of hair and tossing of hair around.
Denny's account is a great account if you like being entertained, on that level as well. Because he and Peter, man, they both they've got their deal. Their fake news, their fake press conferences, all their little skits that they do. Classic stuff, man. I definitely enjoy where he goes with some of that stuff.
Yeah, the Fantasy Mensa is the Pete Overzet and Denny brand where they do. And one of the things that Denny talked about when we were golfing to share the story was when he was taking off his mask. He have a video of him being an NFL coach taking off his mask, like yelling like the coaches were in the start of the season last year. And then he said when he was doing that video, his neighbors were all like watching him, and they were like, "What's this guy doing back there?" And he's in his backyard taking off his mask and yelling for the camera and stuff. And they were just like, what the hell?
He's probably the sanest guy and his whole neighbors think he's a complete nut job, which is probably fantastic, because he has that whole straight man look anyway, like he's got that, he's well, the whole corporate grooming kind of, he's got that whole stand-up guy who's got his stuff together. So I'm sure he lives in a neighborhood with a bunch of people who have their stuff together. And then, like, they see him doing that, and they're like ready to call the cops on him, probably.
Like, what is this guy doing? Well, one last story to make fun of him before we go for next year. As we were driving in the cart, he was shielding his hair with his hands so that the air would not hit his hair. And so I'm definitely going to crush him about that.
Shoot, you could just play back what we talked about with him and have me characterize it, because of course I'm probably the exact opposite. There's people probably scared and have reason to think they should call the police just seeing me and I don't even have to say anything sometimes. So
I'm in that camp.
I'm more in that camp nowadays than I used to be, but for sure.
Oh, that's a good note to end it. Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate you so much. Yeah, and we'll be back next week over here from Fan Team Advice. I am Scott. This is Jamie. Appreciate you all. And if I can find the button to actually, my mouse isn't working. So, sometimes that's how it goes.